Hey, y'all. Today we're going to talk about the election of 1824. Now, I know you may be thinking, why do we need to learn about some presidential election that happened in 1824? Well, this was kind of a big deal. First of all, you have to understand that even though we're a very young country at this point, less than 50 years old, okay, but we are really starting to get this whole democracy thing figured out. We like democracy. We like the fact that people can vote, and they're really enjoying that. Now, it's important for you to understand, though, not everybody can vote, okay? In order to vote, you had to be a man over the age of 21 years old, mostly a white man. Okay, there were a few African Americans that had the right to vote in some of the northern states, but it really wasn't very many, and so people are voting. And at first, that's kind of a new concept to Americans, in a way. They had held elections and we had voted before, but because of the way America was set up, it was so different than anything that was going on in Europe. It was still kind of a new concept. In Europe, they had what's called a class system, okay? And that meant you were born into a certain class. And by class, I mean if you were privileged, if you were well off, if you were poor, whatever. So if you were a poor person, and then it would be expected that you would marry somebody else that would be poor, your kids would be poor, and so that kept going on, and everybody just stayed poor. If you were rich, then you were expected to marry somebody that was rich, and your kids would be rich, and they'd marry somebody that was rich. And so whatever class you were in is the class that you stayed in. In America, though, that wasn't the way it was. As a matter of fact, we had some visitors come from Europe, and they were really surprised that a lot of the American servants and maids and that kind of thing expected to be treated with respect. In Europe, they had these little bells, and they'd ring their little bell, and when they rung their little bell, then the servants would come and see what they wanted. In America, that mess wasn't flying. These people wasn't coming to no bell, and they still expected to be treated with dignity and respect. So that's a new concept at the time. So, because people have started to vote, and even the poor people feel like their vote matters, their opinion matters now. Where in Europe they didn't feel that way, and so people are starting to exercise their right to vote. And so now the right to vote is something called suffrage. You're going to need to know that, okay? Later on, if we get to it, we may talk about what's known as women's suffrage, which is where women earn the right to vote. I kind of doubt we'll get that far in this class, but you'll probably talk about it in Mr. McKnight's class when you get to 8th grade. It's called women's suffrage. But at first, you had to be 21 years old and own land. Well, and then some states made it where you didn't have to own land. And so that was great because the people that own land were typically farmers, and big farmers, wealthy farmers. Now, if you worked in a store or you were a shopkeeper or whatever, if you were a blacksmith, then even though you didn't own land, you could still vote. And so that was a big deal. Now, in the election of 1824, we had some pretty key people that were running for president of the United States. One was a guy by the name of John Quincy Adams. Now, we talked earlier about a guy named John Adams. John Adams was there in the Revolutionary War. He was the second president of the United States. John Quincy Adams is his son, okay? And so now he's running for president of the United States. Also, there was a guy by the name of Henry Clay. Now, Henry Clay didn't, well, we'll talk more about him later. There was Andrew Jackson and a guy by the name of William Crawford. Now, William Crawford wasn't able to finish. He got sick and he wasn't able to complete the campaign, but he was running. Now, remember we talked about Andrew Jackson. He got the nickname in the Revolution, or excuse me, the War of 1812 as being called Old Hickory because the guy said he was tough as hickory, and so they called him Old Hickory. And a lot of people knew Andrew Jackson, and they really liked him. Now, the deal about Andrew Jackson was he was a war hero. Everybody knew who he was. He grew up poor. He even though he didn't end up that way, he grew up poor. He was born in a log cabin. His parents were very small farmers, didn't have a whole lot of money. And so because of that, the poor people could relate to Andrew Jackson. They felt like he was kind of their guy. You know, he was looking out for them. And so Andrew Jackson had a lot of support in this presidential campaign. Now, in order to be president, in order to win the presidency, remember we talked about the electoral college before in class. One person has got to get over half of the electoral votes. Well, because you got four people here who are running, and nobody got over half of them. Okay, Andrew Jackson got more votes than anybody else, but nobody got over half of the electoral votes. And so at that point, it falls to Congress to decide who the president's going to be. Well, Clay came in fourth place, and so because he came in fourth place, he wasn't even in the running. But he was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And so he had some influence, and he urged the House of Representatives to go to vote for Adams and to pick Adams to be the president. And that's what they did. Now, when Adams became president, then he turned around and gave Clay a job he made him the Secretary of State. So a lot of people felt like this was really some kind of dirty dealing, some backroom dealing, shady stuff going on right here, including Andrew Jackson. And so Andrew Jackson is mad. He is ticked off. A lot of the people are ticked off. And so one of the things that John Quincy Adams wanted to do was draw the country closer together, bring everybody closer together. But now, because everybody's mad because he won the presidency instead of Andrew Jackson, he has a really, really hard time doing that. He has some pretty good ideas. He feels like the federal government ought to promote the economy and that kind of thing. So he wants the federal government to come in and build some roads and canals, and that'll make it easier for farmers to get their crops to the store or whatever so they can sell them. And Congress kind of goes along with some things that he wanted to do, but most of the things he wanted to do, they wouldn't let him. They shot it down. So anyway, that's the election of 1812. Your two biggest guys running were Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. Andrew Jackson got the most votes, but he didn't win half the electoral college. So the House of Representatives ended up picking John Quincy Adams, and he became the president. Now, really, none of that was illegal. It wasn't backroom deals or anything like that. It was the way the Constitution is set up. It's the way the Constitution is planned for it to go. But because people didn't like the way it turned out, they still got pretty upset about it. Listen, y'all take care of each other. I miss you. I don't guess I'm going to get to see you again this year, but I sure can't wait till next year because I miss you all. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.